The two boys behind the counter didn't bother whispering. They didn't think they had to. Look at this guy. Walking museum exhibit. Bet he's looking for a part they stopped making in '72. Take it slow, Gramps. We close at 6. The old man with the cane didn't look up. He didn't flinch. He just kept walking down the plumbing aisle, one careful step at a time, his free hand trailing along the metal shelving for balance. The faded patch on his shoulder caught the fluorescent light for half a second. Green, gold, an arrowhead. And then he turned the corner and was gone. The two clerks laughed. They didn't know that in the back office, behind a closed door, a man in a flannel shirt had just looked up from his computer. They didn't know what was about to walk out from behind that door. They didn't know that in the next 10 minutes, one of them would be crying in the parking lot, and the other would be standing perfectly still, hands at his sides, listening to a story he would never forget for the rest of his life. If you believe a man's worth is never measured by his clothes or his cane, type the word respect in the comments before this story begins. Let's see who's still listening. Master Sergeant Walter Hendricks was 74 years old and lived in a small bungalow on Maple Avenue, 3 blocks from the hardware store. He had been a widower for 9 years. His wife, Eleanor, had died of pancreatic cancer in the spring of 2017, and the house had felt too quiet ever since. He filled the quiet with small things. Coffee at the diner every morning, the crossword in the local paper, the slow walk to the post office to check his box on Saturdays. The cane was newer than people thought, only 3 years old. A bad fall on the back steps the first winter after Eleanor died had left him with a hip that never quite healed right. The doctors had wanted to operate. He had told them, with a small smile, that he had been opened up enough times in his life. He would take the cane. Almost no one in town knew what Walt Hendricks had done before he came home. They knew he had been in the army. They knew he kept to himself. They knew he had lost a friend or two. That was about as much as he had ever offered. The faded green field jacket he wore in cool weather was older than most of the people in the hardware store that afternoon, and the patch on the shoulder, what was left of it, was a Special Forces arrowhead. He had served 3 tours in Vietnam with the 5th Special Forces Group. He had spent 22 years after that as an instructor at Fort Bragg and Camp McCall, in the cold and the mud and the dark, teaching young men things that could not be put on paper. He had trained more than 2,000 soldiers across the length of his career. He remembered most of their faces. He remembered all of their names. But on this particular Tuesday afternoon in October, with a thin grey rain falling outside, Master Sergeant Walter Hendricks was not thinking about any of that. He was thinking about a leaky faucet. The bell above the door of Whitmore's Hardware jingled when Walt pushed it open. He paused on the mat to stamp the rain off his boots, took a breath against the ache in his hip and started toward the plumbing aisle. The store was quiet. A radio played country music somewhere near the back. 2 young men stood behind the front counter. One of them couldn't have been more than 19, with an undercut and a nose ring. The other was maybe 23, taller, broader, the kind of young man who had once played football and never quite let it go. They were leaned over their phones. They looked up when Walt came in. They looked at him a little too long. "Help you find something, sir?" the older one called out. The word sir came out flat. It came out the way teenagers say ma'am to a teacher they don't like. "Just looking for a washer," Walt said quietly. "Faucet in my kitchen. Aisle 4, halfway down, on your left. Thank you." He walked. The cane tapped softly on the linoleum. He had taken about 10 steps when he heard the first laugh. "Bro, did you see his coat? That thing's been through Korea. Vietnam, dude. Vietnam. I bet he's got like a metal plate in his head. Probably tells the same story to everyone he meets. Back in Saigon, blah blah blah." They were not bothering to lower their voices. The older one, the football one, was clearly performing for the younger one. Walt had heard it before. Not in this store, not in this town, but in airports and supermarkets and the line at the pharmacy. There was a particular flavour of contempt that certain young men reserved for old men who moved slowly. He had stopped trying to understand it years ago. It was easier to simply not hear it. He found the washers. He put on his reading glasses and bent down, slowly holding the shelf for support to look at the small plastic packets. His hip protested. His knee protested louder. He ignored both of them. "Hey, Gramps, you need a hand back there," the older one called. "Don't fall, old-timer," the younger one added, and they both laughed. Walt picked up a packet, the wrong size. He set it back. He picked up another. He held it up to the light. His hands were shaking a little, not from the laughter, From the cold. He told himself it was from the cold. He was reaching for the third packet when he heard the door at the back of the store open. Footsteps, heavier than the boy's, slower, a man's footsteps. "What's so funny up here?" a voice said, low and even. The laughing stopped. "Nothing, Mr. Whitmore, just talking." "Talking about what?" "Nothing." There was a long pause. Walt did not turn around. He kept his eyes on the packet in his hand. "James, take the register," the voice said. "Tyler, go in the back now." "Mr. Whitmore, we were just—" "I said now." Walt heard the swinging door at the back of the store open and close. He heard one set of footsteps walk away, fast. He heard the other set, the heavier ones, start down the aisle toward him. His hip ached. He did not turn around. He didn't know why. Maybe because he had spent 50 years not turning around when other men's footsteps came up behind him, because that was the kind of habit that had once kept him alive. The footsteps stopped about 6 feet behind him. There was a long silence. Then the man behind him said very quietly, "Sir, excuse me, sir. Could you turn around for a moment?" Walt straightened up slowly, using the shelf for support. He turned. The man standing in the aisle was in his late 40s. He wore a flannel shirt and jeans and a pair of work boots with paint on them. He had close-cropped greying hair and a face that was struggling, very hard, with something Walt could not yet name. The man's eyes went to the patch on Walt's shoulder. He stared at it. His mouth opened, then closed. "Sir," he said, his voice cracked on the word. "I'm sorry, I have to ask. Are you Master Sergeant Hendricks? Walter Hendricks, Special Forces, Bragg?" Walt did not answer right away. He had not heard anyone use that full name and rank in nearly 20 years. "I was," he said finally. "A long time ago." The man closed his eyes. He put a hand on the shelf to steady himself. When he opened his eyes again, they were wet. "Sir," he said, "you trained my father." The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere up by the register, a phone buzzed and was ignored. The country radio played softly. James, the older boy, was standing very still behind the counter, watching them, not understanding, his hands flat on the wood. "My father was Daniel Whitmore," the man said. "Sergeant First Class, 5th Group. He went through your selection in 1989. He talked about you, sir. He talked about you every day of my childhood. Every day. He used to tell my brother and me that there was a man named Hendricks who taught him how to be quiet under pressure. He said when he was scared in country he heard your voice in his head. He said you saved his life and never even knew you knew his name." Walt swallowed. "Daniel Whitmore," he said softly. "Tall kid. Green eyes. Couldn't pass the Nightland nav the first time. Came back in the morning soaking wet and asked to do it again." The man called James Whitmore put both hands over his face. "That was him," he said. "That was him, sir. That was my dad." He took a breath. He wiped his eyes with the back of his hand the way men do when they are trying to keep something from spilling all the way out. "He passed in 2019, sir. Lung cancer. Toward the end he couldn't talk much, but he had this old photograph from Bragg, and he kept it on the table by his bed, and he used to point at it and say your name. He always said if he ever met you again he'd want to shake your hand." Walt looked at this middle-aged stranger crying quietly in the middle of his own hardware store, and something inside his chest, something that had been folded up and put away for a very long time, came loose. "I would have liked to shake his hand too, son." James Whitmore stepped forward. He held out his hand. Walt took it. The man held on for a long time. When he finally let go, he turned around. The boy at the counter. Tyler had not come back from the back room, but James, the older one, was still there, frozen, white-faced, beginning to understand. "James," the owner said. His voice was different now, steady, cold. "Come here." The boy came around the counter. He walked slowly. He stopped about 3 feet from them and could not look at the old man with the cane. "I heard you," James Whitmore said. "I heard you both, from the back. I heard every word. Sir, Do you know who this man is?" The boy looked up. His eyes met Walt's for 1 second and then dropped to the floor. "No, sir. This man taught your generation's fathers how to come home alive. This man spent more nights in the woods at Fort Bragg than you have spent in your own bed, son. This man lost friends. Real friends. Men whose names are carved into a wall in Washington, so that you and I could stand in this store on a Tuesday afternoon and sell people washers, and you laughed at his coat." The boy's chin trembled. "Sir, I'm so sorry. Don't tell me. Tell him." The boy turned to Walt. The fluorescent lights made his eyes look very young. "Sir," he said, "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't know. I'm sorry." Walt looked at him for a long moment. He looked at this kid, 19, maybe 20, the age Walt himself had been when he first stepped off a plane in Da Nang in 1971. This kid had not yet done a hard thing in his whole life. This kid had not yet learned what learning costs. "It wasn't about knowing, son," Walt said. His voice was not unkind. "You don't have to know what a man did to give him the dignity of buying a washer in peace. You just have to be the kind of man who gives it anyway." The boy nodded. Tears slid down his face. He did not wipe them away. "Yes, sir. What's your name?" "James, sir. James Cooper." "You go on home tonight, James Cooper. You sit somewhere quiet. You think about the kind of man you want to be, and tomorrow morning you come back here and you start being him, you hear me?" "Yes, sir." "All right then." James Whitmore, the owner, put his hand briefly on the boy's shoulder. "Go on in the back, we'll talk later." The boy went. The swinging door closed behind him. For a long moment the two men stood alone in aisle 4 of Whitmore's hardware. Walt was still holding the packet of washers. James Whitmore, who looked more like his father with every passing second, was staring at it. "Sir," he said, "please, the washers are on me. Anything you ever need in this store for the rest of your life is on me. And I would consider it the honour of my life if you would come to my house this Sunday for dinner. My boys, my dad's grandsons, they should know you. They should know who you are." Walt looked at him. He thought about Eleanor. He thought about all the Sundays since 2017, when he'd eaten alone at his kitchen table with the leaky faucet ticking out the seconds. "I would like that very much, son." James Whitmore walked him to the door. He held it open. The thin rain was still falling. Out in the parking lot, the kid named James Cooper was sitting on the curb in the rain, his head in his hands, crying. Walt paused at the door. He walked, slowly, over to the boy. He stood there a moment in the rain, leaning on his cane. "Son, stand up." The boy stood. His face was wet. Walt could not tell what was tears and what was rain. "You're going to be all right," Walt said. "You're young. You've got time to be a better man than you were this afternoon. Most of us don't get told that early. You're getting told. Use it." "Yes, sir." "Go on inside. Get out of the rain." The boy went. Walt walked back to his old pickup truck slowly, one careful step at a time. He got in. He sat behind the wheel for a long minute, watching the rain run down the windshield. Then he reached up and touched the patch on his shoulder, the way he sometimes did when he was alone. He drove home. A man's worth is not in his coat. It is not in his cane, or his slow walk, or the shake in his hands when he reaches for something on a low shelf. A man's worth is in what he gave, quietly, when no one was watching, so that the people who mocked him today could grow up safe enough to mock anyone at all. The next morning, James Cooper was at the front door of Whitmore's hardware 20 minutes before opening, in a clean shirt with his eyes red. He worked there for another 6 years before he finally left to enlist. He told his recruiter, on the day he signed his papers, that there was an old man on Maple Avenue who was the reason he was sitting in that chair. That Sunday, Walter Hendricks ate dinner at the Whitmore house. He met 2 boys, 10 and 12, who looked up at him across the table the way their grandfather once had, a long time ago in the rain at Fort Bragg. He told them stories about a young soldier with green eyes who could not pass Nightland Nav the first time. They laughed. He laughed too. And for the first time in 9 years, the silence around Walter Hendricks did not feel quite so loud. If this story moved you, if you believe every old veteran who walks into a hardware store, a diner, a pharmacy in your town deserves to be seen as the man he was, and not the cane he carries, subscribe to this channel and share this story with someone who needs to hear it. In the comments, tell us about the quiet hero in your own life. The father, the grandfather, the neighbour on the corner who never told you what he did, because men like him never do. They earned the silence. It is our job to fill it with respect.